Tragic news coming out of Florida yesterday for a former Seahawk. We're going to be breaking it down on a somber Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12s. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on our Tuesday episode by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Whether you are listening down in San Diego, California, or in Galveston, Texas, we greatly appreciate your support. We're going to be talking a ton of offense later on today's show. We're going to revisit several competitions that are ongoing, including now a very intense competition for the 4th and 5th receiver spot. And we'll be looking at some updated 53-man roster projections on the offensive side of the football. But before we get to that point, Rob, I wish that we did not have to talk about this today. And those of you that follow me on social media, I'm sure that you've seen a few of my posts in the last 24 hours. Alex Collins yesterday, the NFL, the Ravens, the Seahawks all announcing that he has passed away. He died in a motorcycle accident. And Rob, this has been extremely tricky for me the last 24 hours because Alex Collins probably was one of the players in my 5 years on the beat that I had the closest relationship with. I actually talked to him a few months ago. And so this completely rocked me. I'm gutted. I'm devastated, not just because we're losing a great football player. It's way more than that. Alex Collins was an outstanding human being off the field, an infectious smile, a great personality, an Irish dancer to beat. Did a lot of incredible things away from the field. And I don't know if there's been a story that resonated more with me in my time on the Seahawks beat than when he was able to have that redemption arc after missing a season. He made some mistakes and he was able to get back into the league with the Seahawks and proved vital late in that 2020 season when they had all their running backs go down. Gave him good contributions in 2021 as well. But that redemption arc, just the way that he handled that entire situation, the adversity, it's something that has stuck with me ever since. It's one of my favorite stories that I've been able to share. And again, I'm just absolutely devastated today with the loss of Alex Collins, 28 years old, way, way too soon.
Yeah, it's obviously very tragic news. And as you said, and I think very well, Corbin, it's Alex Collins was a terrific football player. He was a better person off the field. The fact that the comments, not only by the Seahawks, and those of you watching on YouTube can read the comments, and I'll read them out loud. This is the statement officially from the Seahawks. It is with heavy hearts that we announce the passing of our beloved Alex Collins this morning. Alex was cherished by his family and friends, as well as supporters from all over the world. All who truly know him can attest to his drive, determination, and larger-than-life personality. We kindly request your thoughts and prayers for our family during this difficult time. We ask for privacy as we navigate through our grief. We will provide updates regarding funeral arrangements as they become available. And, Corbin, in the 20 plus years that I've been covering the NFL, unfortunately, we've seen some players, lose their lives tragically in situations similar to this. But to see so many people from so many different organizations going all the way back to the University of Arkansas, to the XFL, to the USFL, the NFL, that there's so many people out there who were touched in some way by Alex Collins. I don't have the personal memories of him off the field that you do. So I'm going to focus in on what I remember from him on the field. And he was a remarkable player on the field. Going back to his days at Arkansas, he was one of only 4 running backs that ever ran for 1,000 yards in 3 consecutive seasons in the SEC. And when you look at some of the other names on that list, they are some of the most legendary backs of all time. Guys like Herschel Walker and another Arkansas player, Darren McFadden, before him. The fact that, he, again, is such a beloved player. And also, again, it was a guy that when he was asked to play, you mentioned before, that it's one of the resurrection stories. I remember Alex Collins being a guy that maybe was a little bit too big at times for the NFL. He lacked the wiggle that they looked for. So he's like, okay. And he lost some weight, got a little bit quicker laterally, and kind of had that bounce back career after having so much success in college at a slightly bigger size. To me, it's players that have that determination, that are able to change their work habits, slim down or bulk up as their club asks them to do, that really is a testament to their competitiveness, their enthusiasm. And so again, it's with a heavy heart that we are remembering the great Alex Collins today on Locked On Seahawks.
Yeah, it would be easy for me to sit here for 15, 20 minutes talking about my memories on the field. And there certainly were some great plays that he made, whether it was preseason or regular season. I'm remembering against the 49ers at the end of the 2020 season when they were playing in Glendale. You may remember that, Rob, that they had to move the game because of COVID restrictions in Santa Clara, preventing the game from happening there. And Alex Collins had a couple remarkable runs, including a touchdown late that slammed the door on the 49ers. The Seahawks were going to the postseason, NFC West champions, and they had a bunch of injuries in the backfield. So to have him available and come through like that, and Pete Carroll has always used this word with him, he was one of those guys that was a spirit player for the Seahawks in the locker room. And you could see why, being a reporter, this is one of those players that even when he didn't need to, he would always come over and say hi with a big smile on his face to all the reporters. And he had that smile on his face all the time on the field. You could tell how much fun that he had with life. And that's really what I want to talk about with Alex Collins, because again, I'm not going to sit here and say that like he was like my best friend or anything like that. But I mean, I had a pretty good relationship with him off the field and interviewed him a number of different times, and always was one of the most fascinating players to talk to on the Seahawks roster, because he was such a well-rounded guy. Not just the Irish dancing, he was involved with creating a clothing line, the Adversity Killers, which was a great title for what he ended up doing to get back into the NFL with the Seahawks. And he lived by that. And just his curiosity, the couple times that I was able to interview him for lengthy stays, like 20, 30-minute interviews, half the time I'd ask him a question, it would turn into him asking me a question. He was just a very curious guy that was interested in what other people were doing. And that was the thing I loved about him so much. He was an easy interview, easy guy to speak with. And so, for me, it was difficult yesterday to try to come up with words, just because this is a player that, there's a lot of players that I interview in this business, and there's only a handful of them that, I'm blessed to say I was a friend with, and Alex Collins was one of those guys. And so for me, this has been a really tough 24 hours knowing what has gone on and the tragedy that was this motorcycle accident that took his life at the age of 28. Our thoughts and prayers are out to Alex Collins and his family, his former teammates, the ones that are on the Seahawks right now. A lot of these guys played with Alex Collins, and fans as well. This guy was a fan favorite. Everybody, our thoughts and prayers are out with you during these difficult times. We are going to switch gears now. We're going to have to. We got to talk actual football. We're going to shift gears to the offensive competitions that are still taking place for the Seahawks at training camp, and maybe revisit our predictions that we made before training camp on a number of different position groups on the offensive side of the football. We'll get to those here in a moment on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our partners at eBay Motors. They've teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit in your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny has picked for us this week on our eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Pick of the Week. Looking for a safe quarterback to take as a starter late after you wait on the position? Then you can ride with Seahawks quarterback Geno Smith, who was the biggest surprise fantasy QB in 2022, taking over for Russell Wilson. Smith took advantage of a great system under Shane Waldron and was a perfect fit with top wideouts DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. He's back with Waldron and now has rookie dynamo Jackson Smith-Njigba too, and he's an established solid option in fantasy football. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, You can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, taillights, alternators, shock struts, you name it. eBay Motors has it, and they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forward, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to sweating it if your ride needs a little fixing it up, because now you know you'll always be set for success from the get-go. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined for today's show by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Tomorrow, we're going to be having a similar episode diving into defensive competitions that are still taking place in training camp and dishing out our revised 53-man roster projections of the defensive side of the football. Might be some big changes from the previous ones that we dished out before the start of training camp. Let's get to the offensive competitions, shall we, Rob? And there are still a couple of competitions on that side of the football. Two of them are going to be for reserve spots, but still the big one, the center position. I still feel like this is very much up in the air. In fact, coming out of Thursday's game against the Vikings, I feel like Oluwatimi showed enough in that game with the reps that he had, particularly in pass protection, that I think it would behoove the Seahawks going into this game against the Cowboys coming up on Saturday, at least to give him a few sets with the first team. I don't know if they're going to play a lot of starters in this game or not. If they're going to play starters, it would be in the second preseason game. But this does feel like last week, Evan Brown was getting a little bit of separation. I don't know that it's been closed that much, but I do think that the rookie made up some ground last week.
Well, I thought the Oluwatimi had a really solid performance against the Minnesota Vikings. I am fascinated to see how the Seahawks approach this week 2 preseason game against the Dallas Cowboys, because the Cowboys, Corbin, in my opinion, on the offensive and defensive lines, they are as big and powerful as any team in all of the NFL. So, frankly, I think that whether it be Evan Brown, whether it be Oluwatimi, whatever the case might be, whether it be Joey Hunt, I think that the Seahawks are going to struggle to get movement at the point of attack. And that's been the biggest concern that I've had since, we started this conversation. And one of the reasons why I was kind of, chomping at the bit to see Seattle invest an early draft pick or big free agent dollars in the center position. So I said before, I thought that Evan Brown, as the veteran, was kind of the leader in the clubhouse, so to speak. And I certainly like what I saw from Oluwatimi. I think that he has the upside to warrant perhaps being Seattle's starter. Obviously, with the club having the success that they had at offensive tackle with the 2 rookies a year ago, then I think they're feeling a little bit emboldened by that. But again, knowing that the Seahawks start the regular season against Aaron Donald and the Los Angeles Rams, I think that the veteran still is the favorite to lead the Seahawks onto the field at the center position when it comes to week 1 in the regular season. But I would agree with you. I think that Oluwatimi played well enough to perhaps shorten Evan Brown's lead, but I do believe that the veteran still remains in the lead.
I think this game coming up on Saturday, just because of the opponent that they are playing against, as you mentioned, even the second and third stringers, Dallas has got as much depth on their defensive line as you are going to find in the NFL right now. They are going to be throwing tons of athletic guys at this Seahawks front line. I think this is a really good, for a preseason at least, a really good litmus test for both these centers. And how much Evan Brown plays, how much Oluwatimi plays, if he gets any reps with the first team, I mean, that is going to be revealing, just as any preseason game when you're looking at competitions that are this neck and neck. But I do think that, especially for Oluwatimi, this is a really big game. If he is able to build off what he did last week, 27 pass protection reps, no pressures allowed. Brown didn't give up any pressures either. When I initially watched the game, I thought he gave up a few, but it was actually at the guard spots that he gave up some of those pressures. So both these guys were perfect in pass protection in terms of giving up pressures. So that has kept Brown in the lead, even with Oluwatimi's impressive performance. So I'm going to be watching the run game with these two. This defensive line they're playing, can either one of these centers make some consistent push along the line of scrimmage in the run game? I thought Oluwatimi was better in that regard in the game on Thursday night, but he was also playing against backups, third stringers, fourth stringers. Evan Brown got to play against some guys that probably have a chance to be on Minnesota's roster. So we do have to consider the competition aspect of that. Maybe it's me being stubborn, but I'm still thinking Oluwatimi is starting week 1. I don't know how he's going to get there, but I just feel like the rookie is going to find a way here in the next few weeks to turn the tide. And I do think that this is a very close battle. I wouldn't be surprised if Brown holds on and wins the job, but at least for me, I feel like this competition, the rookie has a really good chance to win it. I still like his standing. I like what I saw on film the other day. So again, maybe I'm being stubborn on this one, but I like what Oluwatimi has shown on the practice field and in game action. And I still have a feeling that at some point he's going to be getting this opportunity to try to win this job. And I don't feel like Evan Brown has done that yet. Even though he's been solid, I don't feel like he's come out and said, you know what, this is my job. And so that keeps the door open for Oluwatimi. Now let's go to the receiver position. I didn't think we'd be talking about competitions at the receiver spot. And yet here we are because D. Eskridge is hurt and suspended. Derek Young is still out. He's dealing with an injury. You've got Cade Johnson coming off of a concussion. Thankfully, that's all that it is, with him having to be rushed to the hospital during that preseason game the other day with head and neck injuries. So this is a position group that's been turned upside down in large part because of attrition with injuries and suspensions. And that's opened the door for a number of different guys to battle for a roster spot that maybe going into training camp we didn't think had a chance to be on this football team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the undrafted free agents, Jake Bobo, of course, has, just absolutely planted his flag and saying, hey, I very much am part of this. And that's, I think, the player that we have to kind of highlight here is probably the favorite at this point, which just sounds crazy, but it's not only the plays that he is making at wide receiver, it's the plays that he's making in special teams, as Pete Carroll commented after last week's victory over the Vikings. And it's special teams is where I'm going to kind of stick with here, just because Seattle has had the attrition at wide receiver. One of the players that you did not mention, Cody Thompson, also was held out of the game against the Vikings with an injury, and we don't know the exact severity of it. Knock on wood that he is able to get back onto the field against the Dallas Cowboys, but it's not like those veterans, D. Eskridge, Cade Johnson, Cody Thompson, that they had a significant, lead on the rest of these players. So again, the undrafted free agent Jake Bobo, I think, is somebody we have to mention. Matt Landers, another big, much faster wide receiver, but isn't quite as polished. He, I think, is going to be in the mix. Aesop Winston, because of the injuries to some of the other receivers who have return ability, Winston is currently listed as Seattle's number 2 punt returner, and I think that that's critical as well. The fact that he did come through in the clutch, get that touchdown reception from Drew Lock in the game against the Vikings. Again, to me, I think you got to talk about Jake Bobo here, but if you're looking at body types, if you're looking at different roles in which the guys are going to play, I think that Aesop Winston is another player to keep in mind here as well. But for me, you always want to, have your bold predictions. I went with D. Eskridge as being Seattle's number 4 receiver, when we first started this couple of weeks ago. At this point, I think that the default answer, rather than being D. Eskridge, is now got to be Jake Bobo.
Yeah, I think with the situations with the injuries right now, Bobo is clearly receiver number 4 with the way that he is playing. And it hasn't just been the preseason game. And I want to make sure that our listeners understand that. I haven't been at training camp for the last week. I'm going to be back tomorrow. So I'm really excited to be able to watch a few more of these practices before they ratchet things down, getting ready for the regular season. But Jake Bobo has been a consistent standout in the mock game and in the training camp practices. And Geno Smith's been looking for him when he's had his few opportunities. So he's got chemistry with both these quarterbacks. That special teams play that he nearly made the other day, I actually watched the replay. I don't think he was the player that had his foot on the line. I think he actually made a fantastic play there to keep that football in on that punt. So he is doing all the things right that you need to do as an undrafted free agent to make a football team. And sometimes you got to have some luck, and he's got luck on his side here with D. Eskridge getting hurt and being suspended. And Derek Young, if Derek Young was healthy, I would be having a different answer to this. I would be picking Derek Young as receiver number 4 because even though it's been kind of a quiet camp for him, he did some nice things. And this is a player that's got a much higher ceiling when you look at athletic traits, and you can move him into different position groups. That's something you're not going to do with Jake Bobo. He's not going to play fullback. He's not going to play tight end. He's too skinny. Derek Young has running back background in him, and he's a great special teams player too. So if he can get back, right now we just don't know when he's going to be available. If Derek Young can get back on the field and be healthy for this team before the start of the regular season, then I think he's got a really good chance still to be that number 4 guy with Eskridge out. But right now he's dealing with hip and groin injuries, and those can take a long time to get over, especially if it's a sports hernia-related injury. He could be out for quite some time. And that means right now Jake Bobo is the leader in that clubhouse. And I think it's a pretty significant lead over all the other players that we mentioned that are trying to get one of these final roster spots. Real quick, at the running back position, almost everybody's back healthy, knock on wood. Ken Walker, the third back at practice this week. They got Charbonnet in the preseason game. We got to see him. They've got DJ Dallas ready to go. McIntosh, I've been told in the next few days, they're hoping to get him back on the practice field. So things are looking up in terms of getting that position group healthier. And we've still got a third down running back position that I think is a lot more important than maybe some fans realize. That is an important position in today's NFL. It still feels like that is kind of an open competition there because Kenny McIntosh has been out since the mock game. He had momentum. Now DJ Dallas may be getting some of that back, and it's creating some intrigue. And maybe there's even a third player to consider here because Zach Charbonnet's got pretty good hands out of the backfield.
Well, he's got good hands out of the backfield, and we've seen some pretty impressive performances by Kovac, by Srodrick Thompson. I mean, the Seahawks have some really talented running backs, but similar to how I feel with the center position. Obviously, Evan Brown, this is his first year with the Seahawks. This is DJ Dallas, of course, he's been here for several years now. He's already proven himself to be a reliable third down back. I mentioned before with Aesop Winston at the wide receiver position and his impact on special teams. DJ Dallas is expected to be Seattle's starting kick returner and punt returner. At least that's the way it's listed right now. And so because of that, because Seattle has the confidence clearly they have in his hands, and that's the hands and pass protection skills are, of course, two of the most important qualities you're looking for in that so-called third down back. And I think that you got to go with the incumbent in DJ Dallas, who would be my pick for Seattle's third down back. But at the same time, again, I think that the Seahawks are in a, kind of an embarrassment of riches at the running back position. I feel very, very confident that Kenny McIntosh, I think, is kind of built more like the traditional third down back. And then Zach Charbonnet, everybody knows about his power, but he also showed some pretty deft little lateral quickness in the preseason game. And he certainly has good hands to be able to handle that role as well.
Yeah, my big concern was Charbonnet, and it's not that I don't think he's capable, but he was not asked to pass protect a lot at UCLA. Kenny McIntosh, I think that is one of the best strengths in his game, even though he's a smaller back. He is so technically sound, and he plays physically with his pass protection. He picks up blitzes. So I was a little bummed that he's been out the last week, and he got lucky. That injury looked a lot worse than it ended up being. He's going to be back here in the near future. They're going to have him back in the mix. And I think McIntosh at some point this year is going to be that third down back. But I do think this injury now came at an inopportune time for him. And I feel like DJ Dallas, there is that trust aspect. And he's a good football player. DJ Dallas has come a long way as a pass protector. So for me, I think that this right now is DJ Dallas's spot as well. Though I feel like this is one, and maybe we could say this about receiver down the line. I mean, Eskridge, when he gets back from a suspension, maybe he builds off of what he had done in the first 2 weeks of training camp when he looked really good. But that's a big if for a guy that's got a lot of question marks with injuries and obviously the suspension. I think this is a situation where at the running back position, DJ Dallas could have this job the first few weeks of the season, and then Kenny McIntosh could end up seizing it because of his pass catching ability. You could move him around the formation, and his pass protection skills, I think, are outstanding. So he would be a natural fit for that spot. I'm just not sure that Charbonnet, even though he checks off the receiving ability, he's not going to be a guy you can move around the formation like the other two guys are. And he's not a guy that I'm necessarily as confident in his pass protection ability at this point. Could he get there? Absolutely. But so I do think this one is close. If McIntosh gets back in the next few days, he maybe still wins it. But I'm with you. I think DJ Dallas is going to be the one, the incumbent early on is going to be the third down back for the Seahawks. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined as always by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Every day is tomorrow. Defensive competitions. We're going to revisit them, where things stand at positions like edge rusher, as well as cornerback and backup safety. Should be a really fun episode. We'll also be diving into some defensive 53-man roster projections. And without further ado, let's get to the offensive side. We decided to split this up, Rob, for a couple days here. And we like to do this after every preseason game. We like to revisit the 53-man roster. And I don't know how much these exhibition games really impact which players make football teams. And at the same time, you get guys like Jake Bobo that go out there and legitimately put up nice numbers. They're doing it on the practice field. That has great value for a guy like that, finding a way onto this football team. Last year on defense, Joey Blunt, the plays he was making in the preseason on special teams, that won him a roster spot. So these games are still very important, and they can change those last couple roster spots that coaches are trying to figure out who's going to be in those different positions. So let's talk on offense, Robin. We've looked at a few positions with competitions, but I'm curious to see where the two of us may have some differences in terms of this offense, because I feel like the offensive side of the ball, a lot of these positions are pretty well set in stone because Seattle has so many players coming back from last year's team, so many stars coming back. There are a few positions that have new starters, but for the most part, there's a lot of continuity on this side of the ball. And a lot of the bickering for roster spots has to do with players that are further down in the depth chart.
No, it really does. And so at the quarterback position, for example, you and I both have the top two quarterbacks, Geno Smith and Drew Lock. Neither of us have Holton Ahlers currently making this team, although I think that he'd be an intriguing practice squad possibility. And of course, the NFL instituting a third down emergency quarterback rule, then I think that it could be interesting to see if Seattle chooses to take advantage of that, or if they feel comfortable enough with the two veterans. At the running back position, we agree on the top four. I have Nick Bellore coming in as a fullback. I believe you'll probably have him at linebacker, still making this club. So the running back position, we are virtually the same. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can see that Corbin has a handy little graphic here that lists DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett as Seattle starting, two wide receivers, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Jake Bobo behind each of those two. What's going to be interesting is Derek Young and D. Eskridge. Of course, Derek Young is possibly a PUP list candidate, the Eskridge being suspended. For me, I have Jake Bobo right now, as well as Issa Winston on this roster. But as I mentioned before, I'm really interested at the center position, how Evan Brown and Oluwatimi are able to perform against the Dallas Cowboys. Just like how I mentioned how Dallas is so physical and deep up front on the defensive lines. Corbin, to me, there is one cornerback group that I have seen in the NFL that I think ranks with the Seahawks, and that's the Dallas Cowboys. And so I am fascinated to see if Jake Bobo was able to get any type of separation against the Dallas cornerbacks as easily as he was able to do against the Minnesota Vikings cornerbacks. And the same thing with Issa Winston. He now has this opportunity. He's going to make this club. He's going to have to do something as a slot receiver and in the return game. And I think that he's going to get those opportunities as well. So at the, those first skill position groups, as well as tight end, where we basically have the exact same three, the same three that everybody has: Will Dissly, Noah Fant, Kobe Parkinson. We basically agree there. It's along the offensive line that we have some differences, but I'll let you kind of break that down, as well as comment on anything else that you want to say about the skill position differences on our initial top 53 boards as well.
Yeah, you and I are thinking pretty much on the same tangent when we're looking at the skill positions. There is one significant difference on my 53 at this point, and it is that receiver position. Instead of Easop Winston, I have Cody Thompson making this roster. And the reason that I'm saying this is just based on some of the commentary, some of the communication that I have had with people in the last few days. I think if Cody Thompson was more on the bubble, that he would have tried to play on Thursday night. And that is what I have kind of gathered from the conversations I've had, is that they know who Cody Thompson is. Even though he missed last season, he's been around for a few years. Sanjay Lal holds him in very high regard, a very savvy, smart player. And we know he can play special teams. A couple of years ago, to end of the season, he was involved in a blocked punt that ended up getting the Seahawks a win over the Cardinals to close out the season. So he is a capable special teams player. A little bit bigger guy, 6'2", so another player that gives you a little bit of size at that position. And he can run routes from the slot as well as outside. And so I've got him over Aesop Winston. I could see either one of those players getting in, though. Winston has got a lot of momentum that he has built to this point, but Thompson's a player that's got a little bit more long-term credit in this organization and with Sanjay Lal. So I think Cody Thompson right now is that extra receiver that makes the team. And I have Derek Young opening the season on injured reserve because I just have a feeling that this is going to end up being something that's sports hernia related, and he might have to do something to try to take care of that. So who knows when Derek Young is going to be available for this football team. We know Eskridge is out at least the first 6 games with his suspension. He's dealing with a knee sprain on top of that. As for the offensive line, this has really been the one area where it's been chalk for me the entire offseason when I've been putting these 53-man roster projections together. And yet I was torn on a couple of positions here, namely the tackle spot, because I feel like Stone Forsythe has kind of taken a step back so far in this training camp and preseason. I thought he really struggled in that game against the Vikings. With that said, I still believe in his upside. I like the way that he played, subbing in for Abe Lucas last year in a spot start. I still believe enough in him that I think as a swing tackle that he needs to be on this roster. And Jake Curran's ability to play multiple positions and experience playing those positions in NFL games, going to keep him on the roster as well. You're going to have the 2 centers. You're going to have Bradford behind Phil Haynes. I just feel like the line for the most part is pretty set in stone, though I do think that the left tackle position, the backup, I think that is one worth watching, and I think that you've maybe gone a little differently in that position group.
Yeah, I have. And so similarly, as I mentioned before, it's like my big caveat at the wide receiver position is I want to see Jake Bobo be able to get free against corners as talented as the Dallas Cowboys. The same thing here at left tackle position. I want to see whether it be Stone Forsythe or Jalen McKenzie. If either one of them are able to hold up in pass protection as well as get good push in the running game against a front as solid as Dallas's. To me, this is a massive game in the evaluation of that backup left tackle position. We know, of course, that Charles Cross is going to be the starter. Or, as you said, I mean, basically this is chalk. We agree almost 100% on the rest of the offense. But the 2 big differences being Jake Bobo, Cody Thompson, Aesop Winston at the wide receiver positions, and then again the backup tackle. I currently have Jalen McKenzie because I just see more upside with him. I saw more physicality against the Minnesota Vikings, but he has got to keep up that momentum. If he is able to do so, then I think that he may make me look pretty smart by projecting this. But at the same time, I think right now, if you had to make that cut right this moment, I think the Stone Forsythe is the incumbent. I just think that what I saw with McKenzie leads me to believe that if he can continue that momentum, that he may just steal away that position from Stone Forsythe.
And I'm wondering how much that run game is going to play into that. That is where I have my reservations a little bit here with Stone Forsythe. And some of it is he's 6'8", and there are natural leverage issues that I don't know that he's necessarily ever going to be able to make up for or compensate for. Being that tall, you can only get so low. And so I think in the run game that is continuing to be a persistent issue for him. And if he's struggling in pass pro, his athleticism, his ability to move his feet, that should be an area that is a strength for him. And yet Minnesota had a lot of success getting past him the other night. It was just one preseason game, but that was not an encouraging development for me. So this is not something that I was thinking about going into training camp. I thought Forsythe was going to be the swing guy no matter what, but I do wonder if this is turning into a competition. I'm not ready to say that Jalen McKenzie is going to steal that roster spot as you are predicting, good sir, but you did this with Joey Blunt last year and he made me look silly. So maybe this is going to be your pick to click on offense and McKenzie gets that roster spot. If he keeps playing well against Dallas and Forsythe continues to struggle, then I do think it's possible that we could see a switcheroo there that nobody was anticipating going into training camp. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure that you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, going to be a kind of a rinse and what's the saying?
Rinse
repeat type ordeal. We're going to be having defensive discussions, competitions on defense, edge rushers, cornerbacks, safeties, and of course our 15-man roster projection on defense, updated after the first preseason game. Hope you'll be listening in. Thanks for tuning in to our Tuesday episode, and go Hawks.